Yeah, the issue I was talking about is the issue about the land appropriation in South Africa. The land in South Africa belongs to black people, black people in particular, and Africans in particular, in black people. Africans or black people. It's just the same word. Africans mean blacks. The original people of the land in South Africa, in the south of Africa, or the SADC, in the southern region of Africa, are black people or Africans. Okay, you need to understand that when Europeans came to Africa, they didn't colonize only the Cape Town. No, look, South Africa belongs to black people. Okay, it doesn't belong to so-called Cape Coloureds. Cape Coloureds are mixed people. Okay, Cape Coloureds are a mixed group. They are a mixed, most of them. Look, the Afro Forum is a joke. I want to understand. I want to tell you this: the land in South Africa belongs to black people, or what you call Africans. I don't care whether they are Xhosa, Zulu, Venda, Sotho, Nguni, Ndau, whatever, because so the south of Africa was not occupied by the what you call the South Africa was not occupied by the Khoisan. The Khoisan didn't occupy all South Africa. The Khoisan was just one of the tribes in Africa. It's just one of the African tribe. This idea that the what do you call the Khoisan with the ones which were the so-called the first nation. There's nothing called first nation. Africa was colonized as a whole. Okay, when the same European settlers who colonized South Africa, they were already colonizing other African countries. Back in the days, Africa did not have a nation. Africa was one huge continent with at least 300 and with the 3,400 tribes. Africa has got 3,400 tribes. You know what I'm saying? But all of them are black. So you cannot. Nigeria alone has got 260 tribes. All of them are blacks. You can't go to Nigeria and pinpoint who is a real Nigerian, or really who is the real tribe owner of Nigeria. There's nothing like that. Okay, you need to understand that the history of Africa. Africa was taken as a continent, and it was shared among European countries, European colonial powers back in 500 years ago. Now, someone was wanting to talk about there was someone who was saying, oh, black people are the Bantu. The Bantu came from West Africa. There's nothing called West Africa. The word Bantu itself, it's a Zulu word meaning people. You know, in Africa we don't use the word B. In the Zulu language there is no B. B is called Bantu. You know what I'm saying? So when our African ancestors were explaining to European settlers that the black people are called Bantu, Europeans used the word B for Bantu. There's nothing called Bantu. You know, because if you go to Nigeria and say, well, Nigeria is a Bantu, you take their DNA, they don't belong there. Most of the Nigeria belong throughout the rest of Africa. You cannot pinpoint a region of Africa and say this is the birthplace of a black person. There is no place in Africa which a black person evolved there. Black people are different in Africa. They've got different type of features. The so-called Khoisan people, they were not the first nation in Africa. They were not the first people in South Africa. They were not the first people in Africa. You know, when Europeans came to Africa, they didn't come to South Africa alone. They came to Ghana. They could have said the Ghanaians own the rest of Africa. They could have come to Kenya. When they came to Kenya, they met the Maasai. And Kenya itself has got 42 tribes. Now, Tanzania has got 48 tribes. You know, when Europeans came to Africa, they didn't know that Africans have got different tribes in them. They were treating black people pretty much as blacks. They never treated, Africa as they never treated black people. They never know that Africans have got different tribes in them. They were just treating black people as pretty much one thing. You know what I'm saying? So when I hear these people talking about how, when I hear there's another guy who talk about, when Europeans came to Africa, to South Africa was not occupied. Black people were occupying 9% of the land of South Africa. You are a joke. Your propaganda lying campaign is not going to work to me. All Africa belong to black people. All of it. All from north to Cairo. Everything you see in Africa belongs to black people. You understand me? Everything you see in the continent of Africa belongs to black people. All of it. 100%, all of it. Don't cherry pick and say, well, when you came to this land, look at the country today called Russia. 75% of Russia is cold. North of Russia, it's all snow. You're not going to go there and claim that land and say, well, since Russia is not occupying it, Russia will go to war with you. You know what I'm saying? You can't go to United States and say, well, 48% of America's land is not occupied. Should black people go there and claim it and say, well, we didn't see anybody? About 42% of Canada's land is not occupied. Should black people go there to Canada and say, well, it now belongs to us because nobody's in it? 28% of land in China is not occupied. Should black people go there and claim it? You cannot do. Look, I've got 2 cars. They both belong to me. Okay, you cannot say, well, the one you are not driving, it belongs to me. It's still mine. You cannot just go and take someone's property and because the person is not using it and say it belongs to us. In the continent in Africa, 90% of African people did not use land for land was used for grazing cattle. In South Africa, throughout Africa, land was used for grazing cattle. That was the biggest main thing, because cattle were used for ukulobola, marriage. You know what I'm saying? So African used land for wildlife grazing and our cattle grazing, our livestock. You know what I'm saying? So if you come to a land which I'm using for my cattle for feeding, and say, well, because you're not using for farming and you just come and occupy it and say, well, now it belongs to you. What kind of a joke is that? You need to understand the history. Africa belongs to black people. The entire Africa. You don't go and take what belongs to me because I'm not using it. You know what I'm saying? If I've got 5 women in Africa, many men sometimes they marry 4 or 5 women. One man can marry 5 women, or even 4 women or 3 women. You're not gonna say, well, since you are not sleeping with the remaining 2, let me take them over. It doesn't work like that. You know what I'm saying? A lot of land on earth is not used. But look at China. China is claiming even sea, which is close to its land, as itself. You're not going to go and say, well, since the sea is not used, it's mine. Many countries go for war, protecting the land, even the land they don't use. You know what I'm saying? The land which you are not using is still ours. You are not going to say, well, why is there any African black person in Europe, Asia claiming land? No. Why is that? But there is still huge quantities of land which is not used. You see what I'm saying? You need to understand, Africans are the native owners of land. All Africans. You see what I'm saying? The Khoisan people were the Khoisan were found by European in the place which was named Cape Town. The Khoisan people who were there, they were hunter-gatherers. They're not the only hunter-gatherers in South Africa. Every black person is a hunter-gatherer in Africa. Every black person is a hunter-gatherer. When Europeans came to Africa, they didn't see farms in Africa. Where do they think black people were eating? We're eating animals. You see, we're eating animals, we hunted animals, and kept livestock, like cattle, for food and milk and things of that nature. And we hunted, you see what I'm saying? Simply because we stopped hunting and then enter into other fields of production doesn't necessarily mean the land which was used for grazing or livestock. In Africa, land in Africa is a commodity which belongs to all black people. It was never divided into who owns land. African people never think land should be owned by a human being. We share it. You're not God. The idea of taking land and dividing into who should own it came from Europe. That mentality came from Europe. Imagine if you have got 200 million people in a country like Nigeria, and only 5 million people divide the entire land. Where do you think the remaining 195 million people go to? If people start saying, well, I own it, I'm the first person to be here, and I'm going to take all, where do you think the rest of the people should go? Leave the country and go overseas? You understand? So the reality of the issue in South Africa, the land issue in South Africa is simple. The land in South Africa belongs to black people. Because you came and found me and found my grazing animals not around. Cattle move. Animals in Kenya, the wildebeest, they move in 2 countries. Which country owns wildebeest? Nobody owns wildebeest. The African wildebeest. Because they live in Kenya, it doesn't necessarily mean Kenyan tribes should own them. No. In another season, the wildebeest moved to Tanzania. The same thing with the elephants. They moved to Tanzania. The Kenyan elephants who move as far as close to Zambia. You know what I'm saying? Nobody, 3 or 4, 5 countries. Elephants in Africa, they can move 5 or 6 boundaries, countries. As far as they're concerned, Africa is nothing but a home of African animals. All African animals belong to Africa. There is no black person who owns them, because the animals use Africa as a house, as a room. They pretty much use Africa as a playground. Our animals in Africa, they have no boundaries. There is no one who can say, well, the elephant belongs in this region. Well, if there is drought, they need to move from this region and go to each another region. Sometimes another region will be 4 or 5 countries away. You see what I'm saying? And the black Africans never divided Africa. Africa was divided by Europeans, number one. Africa was never divided by us. During the colonialization, there is a word called scramble of Africa, the division of Africa. During colonialism, Africa was divided into boundary countries, small units of European powers. So if you want to talk about the land issue in South Africa, you need to understand that Africa was not taken as one country. Africa was taken as a continent, and it was divided among European powers. South Africa was not South Africa. South Africa is not a name. It's just a region of South Africa. A country called Zimbabwe is also South Africa. Botswana is also South Africa. Namibia is also South Africa. South Africa itself has never been given a name. It has been just called South. There is also East Africa, but East Africa has got different names. North of Africa have got different names. You see what I'm saying? The South of Africa was called South of Africa, and it was never named. But the issue I wanted to talk here is the issue of land. The land in South Africa belongs to black people, period. Blacks in particular, and Africans. To be specific, Africans meaning blacks. They're the original owners of the country. They don't only own South Africa, they own Africa. The land in the continent of Africa belongs to Africa. Don't pinpoint and say, well, the black people came from Cameroon. Cameroon is a small country, I don't know, 22 million people. You think all Africans belong in one region? Africans are different. The Maasai have never been in Nigeria. They've never been in Nigeria, but they're very close to each other. They've never lived in Nigeria. They're a completely unique tribal group of a certain region in Africa. You're not going to put all black people with the darker skin in the same region because that's where you think they belong. The Khoisan were hunter-gatherers. That's the same with everybody else. The Zulus were hunter-gatherers. They were not farmers. The Xhosa were hunter-gatherers. They were not farmers. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have machines to everybody owned. Every black person lived in the same way. When someone comes to Africa and start to divide Africa, like this so-called AfriForum people are nothing but fraudsters. You know, that they're a bunch of criminals trying to divide among black people, to prevent the reality from happening. The issue is simple. Africa belongs to black people. The continent itself belongs to black people. Show me any part of I was looking at another guy who was talking nonsense. This other AfriForum guy saying, "Oh, when European settlers came to South Africa, they didn't come to South Africa alone. South Africa was not called South Africa. They came to the southern African region. If they came through the east region, they would have met the Zulus, and they would be claiming, well, Zulus are the first people we saw. Every part of Africa you come through, you're going to see people. The first people you see, they're not the original owner of that land. Those who came through the west of South Africa met the Khoisan. Those who came through the east of South Africa met the Zulu. You see, depending on which part of the pot you came through, it doesn't necessarily mean the first people you meet are the owners of that land. If you come into my house and you knock the door, and then my daughter opens the door for you, she's the first person you meet. You're not going to say my daughter owns the house. She doesn't. She's just the first person you meet. The Khoisan with the first people European met in the south, only the south part of Africa. It doesn't necessarily mean the east is also owned by the Khoisan. The Khoisan never owned anything. I don't want to hear the nonsense so-called Khoi nation. There's nothing called the Khoi nation. The Khoi are part of Africa. They're just Africans. You see, my grandmother, my grandmother is Khoisan. You see what I'm saying? I myself am Zulu. You see what I'm saying? But my mother is Xhosa. So what are you going to do? Are you going to divide against who owns what? And I'm native in Africa. You see, I'm an African and I'm native. People who are called so-called coloureds in South Africa, people who are called coloureds are actually mixed race. There is no tribe in Africa called coloured. Coloured was a word given by Europeans to people of mixed race, those who were born from European settlers. Most particularly, there were white settlers who were marrying into native African females, and the children born, they called them the coloureds. And these coloureds people were born from African native females. They were born from the Xhosa. They were born from the Xhosa females, Zulu females, Khoisan females, Venda females, Sotho females. They were the ones, most of them pretty much were actually women who were raped because there were no laws. The laws prohibit mixing of people. But obviously the settlers would go after Africans. African males never go towards European women. So we know that it was the European settlers, males mostly, who were going after the African females. And when they breed with them, obviously they're going to give birth to children. The children are called coloureds. That's where the word coloured comes from. The word coloured itself it's not a Zulu name. It's a European, it's an English name. You know what I'm saying? It was given to children who were mixed, people of mixed heritage. That's why they're called coloured. Coloureds are not natives. There is a difference between a Khoisan and a coloured. A coloured person is a mixed, a biracial, a person who's born when two tribes of people, when different types of people mix. When white settlers mix with black people, they produce coloureds. They don't produce Khoisan. A Khoisan is native. A Zulu is native. A Xhosa is native. A Sotho is native. My mother is native. I'm native myself. You see what I'm saying? A Maasai is native. But you look at Obama. Obama's father is native in Kenya, but Obama is not a native in Kenya. He's mixed. He's a coloured person. He's what we call in Africa coloured. He's a mixed race. The mother is white, the father is black. The child is called a coloured. Coloured people you see in South Africa today are not necessarily native. They're not natives. You see, the native is a Khoisan. The Khoisan, people who we call, say, Khoisan, white people used to call them Bushmen. Why do they use the word Bushmen or Honti-tons? These are the words which they were given because at the time settlers were using these terms as pretty much an insult word. Most of us black people, they call us kefas. Kefas, you know what I'm saying? Those were insults, pretty much. But the reality I was trying to say here is that the land in the continent belongs to black people. Full stop. All this mentality like, oh, who really owns the land? The land belongs to black people. You're not going to come into my land and say, well, if you're not using the land, that land belongs to me. No black person goes to Europe and try to claim land which is not used. There is a lot of land which is not used in Europe, in America, in Canada, in China. So should black people go there and take it and say it belongs to us because nobody's in it? There are thousands of cars on the street without the drivers. You can't go just say, well, any car without a driver, it belongs to me. No, it has got an owner. You can't occupy things without because there is nobody in it and claim them and say because there was no one. The Khoisan people were not the first ones in South Africa. Nope. 500 years ago, when Europeans came to South Africa, when they came to South Africa 500 years ago, they met the Khoisan. If they were through the west of Africa, which is the Cape side, if they had come through the east, they would have met the Zulus. You know what I'm saying? If they had come through the north of Africa and keep coming down through the north of Africa, they would have found other tribes. You know what I'm saying? So you can't say simply because whoever you meet first is the owner. There's nothing like that. If you come into my house and knock the door, my daughter is going to go or greet you at the door. That doesn't necessarily mean she's the owner of the house. You know what I'm saying? When Europeans took over Ghana a long time ago, Ghana used to be called the Ivory Coast. Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. When they came through the port of Ghana, the first people they met were the Ashanti. They were the first tribe they met in Ashanti. But when they went inside Ghana, they were told there is more than 22 tribes in Ghana. You know, because when Europeans came from Europe, in Europe there is just French. There's no other tribe. If you go to France, they say everybody's French. If you go to Italy, they say everybody's Italy. If you go to Germany, everybody's German. In Africa, it's not like that. Africa is not like that. Africa, every African country does not have one tribe. So if you come to an African country, whoever you meet is going to tell you there are several tribes in Africa. In every African country, there is more than one tribe. Many African countries, some have got 100 tribes, 60 tribes. Tribes are people with different languages, culture, customs. You know what I'm saying? But they're both blacks. But if you come to South Africa and say, well, the first person I met was a Khoisan, that means the Khoisan owned South Africa. The Khoisan did not own South Africa. The Khoisan are part of the tribe. They're one of the tribe. I myself am mixed Khoisan. You see what I'm saying? But inside my DNA, there is Khoisan, there is Xhosa, there is Zulu, there is Sotho, there is Venda. Going back within, because Africans intermarry to other tribes. Africans intermarry to other tribes. You know what I'm saying? But because they're blacks, you know, they share the entire Africa. They don't only share one region. You share the entire Africa. You know what I'm saying? Some of my ancestors come from Angola. Some of my ancestors come from Malawi. Some of my ancestors come from Kenya. Some of my ancestors come from Tanzania. Some of my ancestors come from South Africa. Some of my ancestors come from as way back as you like. You are not going to choose which part of Africa and say, well, this is the party you belong. There's nothing like that. There's nobody who can say, well, you belong here. Why do you think a lot of European settlers say that the Bantu belongs to this region, only that region, because you want to take the continent for yourself? There's nobody who can have the powers and say, well, which part black people belong. Don't have those powers. Africa, black people belong to Africa, the entire Africa. Because all black people moved around. Black people moved around. There is no place in Africa where you can say this is the place where black people started. This is the place where God created the Garden of Eden. There is nothing like that. There's nothing that you don't have that kind of history. The earth is, 30, 60, 90 billion years old. So what are you going to say? Were you there? I heard someone say, the Khoisan, the history of when Europeans came to Africa is 500 years ago. White people didn't come 500 billion years ago. They cannot tell you what was there 500 billion years ago when the earth was formed. You're not gonna come and say and specifically say you know this. You don't have powers to come and claim which part of Africa black people belong to. You didn't create black people. You know what I'm saying? You didn't create black people. There is nobody who's gonna come and say nonsense called, black people are Bantu. There's nothing called the Bantu. Bantu is a Zulu name meaning Bantu or people. It's not even a race. The word Bantu doesn't mean anything. It's a Zulu word meaning people. We call Abantu. Abantu just means people in Africa. The word Bantu itself was Zulus were explaining with European settlers 500 years ago, meaning people. That's why the word they used the Bantu. The word Bantu itself is called people. Nigerians don't use the word Bantu. They're not Zulu speakers. Okay, the word Bantu in Zulu, it's a Zulu language. Means Bantu. It means people. Bantu is not a race, but it has been printed 500 years ago as a race. But in reality, it's a language meaning people. If you translate it into the Zulu language, what does the word Bantu mean? Bantu means people. And we don't use the word Ba. We use the word Bantu, meaning people. Abantu means people. You see, in a Zulu language. But Europeans thought Abantu means a race. It doesn't mean race. The Bantu people moved from there. There's nothing called Bantu people. Black people moved all over the continent. They moved all over the continent. They never stayed in one place. They moved all over the continent. There's no place where you say here is where black people were created by God, as Adam and Eve, and that's where the snake came in and they gave it to Eve, a black woman, eat the fruit, and that's where there's no place you can say that in Africa. You know what I'm saying? Black people moved all over the country, all over Africa. When Europeans came in, they started carving Africa into boundaries to share the continent of Africa among European powers. Okay, the Khoisan are not the owners. They're not the first people in Africa. They were the first people to be found, not the first people in South Africa. That's a lie. A lot of people were in Africa. Many people came to South Africa hunting animals, following animals, animal moving from south of Africa going north. You saw them, and so they moved from south. This is why when European settlers came to South Africa, the Zulus also controlled a lot of kingdoms there. a country called Zimbabwe too. It's got 7 million Zulus in the south of Zimbabwe. You know what I'm saying? So the Zulus called other kingdom, because a lot of kingdoms which were there in South Africa were not militant. The Zulus were the only militant tribe. Other tribes were not militant. The Khoisan did not have a military. It never had a military. I heard someone saying, "Oh, Europeans came and signed agreements and with the local chiefs." There's nothing like that. When the European settlers came to Africa, they didn't classify black people as even as human beings. They didn't sign any. There is no treaties which were signed. That's a lie, 100% lie. Okay, 100% joke. There is no lie. The entire country was colonized through conquest and bloodshed. You know what I'm saying? There is no treaty. You see what I'm saying? There is no place there is no black person in Africa who was treated as a human being back in the days. Most black people back at that time, they were treated as animals. So don't come and talk nonsense and say, "Oh, the settlers came and introduced the settlers came and signed a treaty with the locals." There is no treaty. There's nothing like that. That's a lie. That's a joke. Nothing like that. History as it took place. Settlers came to the continent in Africa, took over, colonized it, and massacred. A lot of our tribes were massacred, wasted. They were not even considered human beings. Later on, signing a treaty, black people were never considered human beings until very recently. The entire continent of Africa, black people were not considered human beings until few decades ago. Few decades ago. So when you said you signed treaty with who? There's no treaty signed. You see, the only person you sign a treaty for is someone you respect. That didn't apply to black people. You understand me? So when you hear this so-called, settlers came to the continent and signed treaty, that's the biggest joke. Who do you fool? You're not going to fool me. You're not going to fool me, because I did my research. You know, not only research what was happening. You can look at it in the books of the history. You can look at the history. Nowadays, you can look at everywhere. Books, history. You can read a lot of books. You can read the historical, what was happening, recent events, everything. Videos, a lot. There's nothing called treaty. There were no treaties signed when the European settlers came to the continent of South Africa. The continent was taken by European settlers and divided. When they took South Africa, they didn't take South Africa alone. No. They took the entire continent and divided it among settlers. So the so-called Khoisan people were not the ones where today's Khoisan people who we see today, most of the people who we call coloureds, they're not Khoisan people. Coloured people are mixed race people. Most of them had European white fathers who were pretty much breeding with the native settlers. You know what I'm saying? Settlers were like I say, Xhosa females, Zulu females, Venda females, Sotho females, and all these females had children. Their children were mixed race because they slept with the European settlers, and so the natives gave birth to what we call today coloured. And if you look at every coloured person in South Africa, they don't have native Khoisan surname. They've got European surnames. There is no real Khoisan people, real natives in Africa, in South Africa, don't have English surname or Dutch surname or what you call Dutch, French, Germany surname, what we see today. I was watching another colored person. I look at the surname, I was like, this surname is Dutch, German, Portuguese, and English. And I was like, how did you end up with this European surname? And every colored person today, you can look at every colored person you see in South Africa. They take their DNA, most of them are half European, half native, half European, half native, half European. They're not natives 100%. I'm native 100% because all my ancestors were black natives. Either Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, they were all indigenous. The colored are not indigenous, they are mixed race people. When a colored person comes and say, "Oh, I'm the first Khoi nation," you're not the Khoi nation simply because you were born from a black local female, but the fathers were not black men. The fathers were actually European. So the so-called coloreds are not necessarily natives. They're not Khoisan. There's a difference between a Khoisan black person and a colored. A colored is not native. A colored is a mixture. It's a hybrid. It's pretty much a mix between blacks and white. That's what is a colored is. Okay? A colored is not natives. I was looking at someone saying the Khoisan nation. There is no Khoisan nation. There is no Khoisan nation. No one in South Africa, there is no black person in South Africa should accept any discrimination from any Khoi person or a colored person. The colored people used to be treated better than black people. A lot of colored people, because a lot of colored people, most of them had white fathers. If you go and look at colored people, most of them have got a parent who is white, another parent is black, another parent is white, another parent is black. They are not Khoisan indigenous people. They are not indigenous people. Okay, so they should not lie. This is why you see a lot of so-called AfriForum. AfriForum wants to support the so-called Khoi nation because they want to use these colored people to say if the colored people have a nation in the Pretoria and other place, so that we support them, so they become coloreds and whites, colored and whites, colored and whites. Black people in South Africa should reject that, should reject 100%. Colored people are not native. They are not native, and they should not think that because they've got a blood of native people, that doesn't necessarily mean they are native. No, they're not necessarily native. Yes, you have got blood DNA of native people, but most of your forefathers were actually foreigners, the European settlers. That's why you've got European surname. In fact, you can go and take your DNA at any time. Go take your DNA. You're going to find yourself 50% European. If you're a colored person, go take your DNA. A real native African does not have foreign blood. It's 100% black. You see what I'm saying? So the issue of someone was talking about how the land in South Africa belonged to, black people were not occupying the land. Black people were occupying the land, but they were not using it for farming. You know what I'm saying? In Africa, 90%, if you go to 90% of 70% of land in the DRC is the jungle. What are you going to do? Are you going to go and take it over and say, well, since no one is farming it, let me take it over, it belongs to me? No, you're not going to take someone's land because he's not using it. You see, you need to understand, land is used for we use it for farming, agriculture, that means livestock. Animal, many black people keep animals. A lot of black people want to keep cattle so that they go and graze. They use cattle for meat. For food, milk, and things of that nature. And in Africa, long back in the days, in our culture, we used cattle for marriage. So a lot of land in Africa was used for cattle ranching. A lot of millions of cattle died with the tsetse flies when Europeans brought their cattle from Europe into Africa. And those cattle had diseases, so they mixed with African animals, and millions of African animals died. You know what I'm saying? But the idea which I was talking is when someone said, "Oh, land appropriation, black people were not occupying land." Land was occupied by black people. It was not used for farming. Black people owned the entire Africa. They were not using it for farming. 90% of land in Africa, if you go to Africa, 68% of land in Africa is wildlife and it's not utilized. You're not going to go and claim it. 65% of land in Africa is not used. Currently, as I speak, you go to the DRC, 60% of land is not utilized. It's forests. You're not going to go and take them. No, we use the forest for timber. But because we're not yet using it, it doesn't necessarily mean you should go and claim it. You see, but back in the days, the European settlers came in and claimed things. And say it's ours. Or because you were not using it. If you see a woman on the street, a pregnant woman on the street, you're not going to just take her and say, well, the baby is mine. Because she was walking alone. If you see children on the street, you're not going to go and kidnap children and say, well, I saw children without a father, without a mother, they all belongs to me. This is what the argument of the so-called AfriForum and all these other people, simply because they are not. Look, you cannot gonna go on the street and kidnap children who you see walking and say because they don't have parents, that means they belong to you. That is stupid argument. Because someone is not using it, doesn't necessarily mean it's not owned. Because 90%, as we speak today, 60% of African land is not being used as we speak. It's animals, forests, trees, desert. It's not being used, but it's owned. You understand? Many black people own things collectively. They never used, black people never put boundary that your trip, because if black people is to put boundaries, you belong there, that would have started conflict. So what black people claimed as theirs was the animals. They owned what you own physically, what belongs to you. A fixed assets like land, that was not owned by anybody. Black people owned land collectively. What was yours was the cattle, goats, donkeys, this and that. What you have, not what's fixed. You're not gonna go to and claim a tree. That mentality came from Europe. Europeans are the first people to come and claim and say, well, this tree belongs to me. You people move that way. This is what they did when they came into the continent in Africa. They came in and started owning forests. Even today, if you go to the continent in South Africa, lions, elephants, cheetah, everything has been completely owned. If you go to South Africa today, it's all owned. And back in the days, you tell me 75% of South African wildlife is now owned privately. 75%. But when they came to Africa, tell me, did the European settlers came with the elephants in Africa? No. Did they come with the lions? No. Did they came with wildebeests? No. Did they came with the buffalo? No. But all these animals are now owned privately. All the wildlife in South Africa today, as we speak, is now owned privately. Privately. You see, who owns them? Most of them are whites. Blacks don't own anything. So the question becomes, did they brought these animals to Africa? Since all these things are owned privately, did they brought them to Africa? No. Now, if you go to South Africa and you want to see lions, elephant, you have to pay them. This is why black people are now demanding that they need to take land. They need to take land back because they see what's going on. Because if you go to the continent in South Africa, black people own only 6% of land. 6. They're 80%, but they own 6%. 6% of physical place. 90% of the black people lives in squatter camps. Squatter camps. You see what I'm saying? And this is why I agree. I believe in what Malema is. Malema's right. Black people used to own land collective. Land was owned by collective. What you do with that land was yours. The cattle, that's yours. Goats, that's yours. They can eat every grass, trees, anywhere. They come to your place and stay, that's yours. But nobody owned physically in Africa. Nobody wanted to say, well, this land is mine, that river belongs to me, because I might want my cattle to go and drink water there. You're not going to claim water is now yours, because the rest of black people who own land, they'll say, what about us? Where our cattle going to drink or feed? That was, of course, conflict. So Africans never wanted a person to own physical land, to demand what you call nature. Nobody wanted someone to come and say, well, the land in this district belongs to me. Nobody. That's a European concept. You see, the land in South Africa belongs to black people. All of them belongs to black people. Black people owned land collectively. What was owned as privately was your livestock. Your goats, your cow, you know what I mean? Your goats, your chickens. Cows can go and eat anywhere in Africa. Any land they can go and feed. You see what I'm saying? What we didn't want was to say the land belongs to such and such a person. That's too much to say a person belongs to. What if for example, what if you have got 2 children and you own 50% of the land, and I've got 20 children and I have no place for my children to go, while you have got 1 child and you own half of the country? You see what I'm saying? Where are my children going to go? To the sea? You know what I'm saying? In Africa, land was always collectively owned collectively. It was never a personal. We never said people should own nature should be owned by a human being. No, nature is for everyone. Imagine if someone say, all the sea is mine. I don't want to see any ship or anyone taking any fish in the sea because it's now owned by me. Can you imagine people doing that? Can you imagine someone saying, well, all the shark in the sea belongs to me? Can you imagine? But that is what happened to the continent. Remember when South Africa was taken back in the days, it was not only South Africa, it was Africa was taken and shared among European powers back in the colonization, back during colonization. So when the so-called AfriForum is a joke. This is a joke. I don't know. I don't even know why they use the word Afri. You know, they should use it as a sort of like white forum or European or Euro forum or European forum, not Afri, to make it look like it's for Africans or it was formed by black people. No, it's not. Afri Forum is a joke. They should change their name Afri Forum. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, but that is the issue I wanted to explain. The land belongs to the people, black people. What you do with it, that belongs to you. Farming belongs to you. Good for you. If you've got farms, cattle, that belongs to you. That's good. If you're using it, everything you have, whether you're using it for farming, whether you use it for farming, you use it for cattle ranging, that belongs to you. But physical land, no. That shouldn't be a human being owning it. You can own property, yes, private property. You can own it. It's okay. That's not a problem. But the issue I was disagreeing with is the guy who came and said that, oh, South Africa was not owned by anybody. You're a liar. South Africa was owned by several tribes. It was not owned. Every black people, Africans in Africa, never claimed land because they shared. They never claimed because claiming was going to result to war. You see what I'm saying? If you have got like Nigeria, 200, there is nearly 160 tribes in Nigeria. Who owns Nigeria? You see what I'm saying? You cannot physically say it among 160 tribes and say, well, that one is the owner of Nigeria, because white people, when they came to Nigeria, they find that tribe. So that is the owner of that country. What are the remaining other tribes? Other tribes will say, what about us? You see, the Khoisan were not the owners of South Africa. They were not the first people in South Africa. They were the first people found. Not they were the first people in South Africa. They were the first people found by those who came through the west of South Africa. So it doesn't necessarily mean they were the first people in there. The Zulus had already came through to the Cape Town, to the south of South Africa, and moved north back. The same thing applies. All other African tribes, they were chasing animals. They're going after hunter. Everybody was a hunter-gatherer. They were chasing animals. You know what I'm saying? If there are two people, look, if someone goes to the bank and withdraw money in the morning, and another one goes in the afternoon to withdraw money, and the bank manager comes and see the last one person to withdraw money at the bank at 6 o'clock, he's going to say it's the first person they saw at 6 o'clock in the evening. They'll say this is the first person they saw in the evening. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the first person to be there at the bank, because some people have been there but they left. You see what I'm saying? In South Africa, the Khoisan were not the first, but they were the first people to be found by European settlers who came through the south. Okay, Europeans who came through the east of South Africa, they would have met the Zulus. You see? So what are we going to do? If you come through the east, you're going to meet the Zulu. If you come through the south, you're going to meet the Khoisan. If you come through the north, through other countries like Zimbabwe, you're going to meet the Sutus, the Venda. So what are you going to say? Well, you're going to say, oh, which tribe really owned South Africa? Nobody owned South Africa. South Africa was not owned. It belonged to black tribes collectively. Okay? Whoever you meet first is not the owner. Whoever you meet first is not the owner. If you come into a house and knock the door, whoever you meet first does not own the house. I could send my daughter to go and greet you at the door. Doesn't necessarily mean my daughter owns the house. You see, so this lying, stupid argument of the Khoisan, the Khoi nation, there is nothing called Khoisan. These so-called people who are pushing these so-called Khoi people with the first people, they're liars. Most of them are not even natives. They're colored. They're people of mixed race people. They're not necessarily native. A real Khoisan native is African. You see, a real Khoisan person is African. But a colored is mixed between black and white. A Khoisan is African. 100%. People who we see in South Africa who are called colored and say, oh, we are the first people to be. You're not the first people. You are mixed race people. You are mixed race. It doesn't necessarily mean you are native. You are not a native. I disagree. You're not native. You know what I'm saying? There was a South African comedian called Trevor Noah. The mother is Xhosa. The father is Swedish, from Sweden. And he is called a colored. Is he a native in South Africa? No, he's not a native. He's a colored. He's just a mixed race people. A lot of colored people say, because we've got light skin which is similar to the Khoi people, I think we are Khoisan people. You are not Khoisan people. You are just a mixed race people. This is why a lot of colored people don't want to mix with the Zulus and other African tribes, because they think they're better than other tribes. Nonsense. Nonsense. Talking nonsense. The South Africa belongs to black people and Africans. Full stop. That's where the land belongs to. Africans. Look at Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was a Khoisan. But he was not the leader of Khoisan. He was the leader of all black people. You know what I'm saying? He was not just a Khoisan. Nelson Mandela is a Khoisan. You know what I'm saying? Are you going to say, well, Nelson Mandela was a Khoisan president? He was not a Khoisan president. He was a president of South Africa. And he was respected by Africans. All black people, not only in America. Look, black people you see in America belong to where? Africa. Blacks in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, Haiti, where do they belong to? Africa. Black people in Brazil, 60 million of them, where do they belong? Africa. Black people in Europe, Asia, Middle East, where do they belong? Africa. They all came from Africa. All of them. So you cannot pinpoint and say, well, they belong to... There is no one country. Nobody was there. You're not God who can say, well, this is where the Garden of Eden was. This is where a black woman and a black man eat the fruit of the tree. You know, this is where Adam and Eve began. No one can pinpoint that. You don't have that history. You don't have that science. No one was there 28 billion years ago. So you're not going to come and say which part of Africa the black people belong. There's nothing like that. That lie is over. We're not going to teach it. Black people belong to all Africa. All of it, every part of Africa belong to black people. All of it. That's the same. Have you ever seen a black person claiming land which is not used in Russia or China or Europe or America or Canada? No. Why? Look at Australia. Australia was 100% black 500 years ago. Where are black people in Australia? All gone. Genocide, all gone. Are you going to give them back the land? No, they're all gone. You see what I'm saying? Same thing with the native Indians in America. Native Indian is now, you go to America, America is 95% white today. Where are the native Indians? You see what I'm saying? When European settlers went to the United States, where did they found? Native Indians there. Are there native Indians left in America? They're all gone. The land was taken over. What happened to them? Genocide. Genocide, all of them. Exactly. And that was happening globally. So when you look at history, you need to look at these things from a historical concept of what was happening on a global scale. Stop looking at the thing from a minor. What was happening in South Africa was happening in Zimbabwe, in Namibia, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Tanzania. All things were happening at the same time. Genocide was almost everywhere. So when you come and say, sort of this part of Africa belongs to the... No, African countries have got hundreds of tribes in them. There is no black person who specifically said he's the owner of Africa. He's the owner of this part of Africa. Because that's where a white man found me here. That means I'm the owner. You're not the owner. If they had found a different group, what were we going to do? If white people had came to South Africa through the east and find the Zulu, what were you going to do? Were you going to say, well, all the land in South Africa belonged to the Zulus because they were the only people we found? You know, if the moment you notice that there are more than one tribe, it's over. That means all these tribes belong to that region. Because someone found you there, it doesn't necessarily mean you own that land. There is nothing called Khoisan nation. That is a propaganda campaign which is being used to divide the people in South Africa, to divide, pretty much to use the so-called colored people, who are pretty much offspring of European settlers against the rest of other black tribes. You know what I'm saying? So I don't buy into the AfriForum propaganda campaign, all this lying and saying, well, who the land was not being used, black people were not being used. All Africans were not using land for farming. They were using the land for animals. You know what I'm saying? Wildlife. Most of them kept, 90% of Africans kept livestock. You see what I'm saying? They did not need farming. They would eat cattle, meat. 95% of Africa. You know what I'm saying? They used the land for hunting. They didn't want the land to be destroyed because they wanted animals to increase so that they would hunt and kill animals for food. The farming itself came from European as a way of saying, let's use the ground to produce food. That was a European concept. Africans would say, well, no, let's keep cattle to graze. That's where you Africans would do that. Leave animals to stay, leave livestock to stay there and increase, so we eat the beef. The Europeans say, well, no, let's use the ground. That was the European concept. So the argument of saying, well, only 5% of the land was used and the Europeans didn't found anybody, that's a lie. That's a lie. Because we're not using that land. Look, how many cars on the street have got people in them? You could find hundreds of cars with no owners inside. Doesn't necessarily mean there is no owner. It's not owned by someone. There are millions of houses which you could go to, which the owners are not around. The owners can go to work and leave the house empty. You don't just jump inside and say the house belongs to you because there's nobody. That's a stupid argument that, oh, when European settlers came to South Africa, there was nobody. You are a joke. They didn't only remember, they didn't only occupy South Africa. They occupy South Africa. They occupy Zimbabwe. They occupy Namibia. They occupy Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, Angola. Were they people? Because when they took South Africa, they didn't take South Africa alone. They took South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Angola, Namibia, Botswana at the same time. Were they people inside? Yes. You see what I'm saying? Were they people? Yes. But why is that they took all these African countries? Were they people in these countries with the land? Yes, they were people. Was the land used for farming? No. You see what I'm saying? So you cannot simply because the land was not being used for the purpose you think it's supposed to be used. Why is that you don't go to Russia and do the same thing? Or Kenya? Or China. There's a lot of land in America, even in Australia, in Canada, which is not used. No country can just go to that country and say, let's take it over. Or 60% of Canada's land is not being used. Let's take it over and make it ours. The countries would go to war if you do that. You can't take someone's land because they're not using it and claim it and say it's yours. That's where I don't agree with the argument and say, well, black people are not. Of course. Look, I've got many plates in my house. I use one plate. You're not going to take all my plates and say, well, since you're not using them, let's take them over. No. Whether I use it or not, I keep several pairs of shoes. I use one a day. You don't claim, you don't take it because I'm not using it. You don't take someone's property because they're not using it. You see what I'm saying? If you go into any nation today, there is land which is not used. There is forests. It's still owned. You know, if every country you go to on planet Earth has got vast lands which is not being used. Vast land. You can't take it. Countries would go to war the moment you go to. Look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia 6 decades ago was a desert. You see, today they're claiming all the desert. Why? Because there's oil under. You can't go to there and say, well, you know, since this desert is not being used, let me claim it. No, you can't do that. It's still owned by people. You see what I'm saying? Because people are not claiming it, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't own it. Africans didn't claim it because they lived as they shared the land. So they didn't want the idea of one person saying it's mine, because that would cause conflict or war. They would rather say, well, anyone who wants to use it can use it. You know what I'm saying? No one should claim it, but everybody can use it. No claiming. Claiming would result in conflict. The moment you start saying, well, this place is mine, you would then need to protect it. You would then need security. You would then need to charge people. You would then need to, all this would cause conflict in Africa. The moment you do that. That's why Africans prevented conflict by saying, well, everybody should use. What you should claim is what you should physically have. I've got my cattle, that's mine. I've got my horses, whether you've got horses, donkeys, they can go and feed in a land and come back, they're yours. But the land or a fixed asset itself, trees, land, you can't claim that. You see what I'm saying? Because people will come and say, well, when did you start building a forest? Since trees have been there for hundreds and thousands of years, how did they become yours? How did the vegetation become yours? Many wildlife in Africa today, in South Africa, in many African parts, is owned by Europeans. Tell me, did Europeans brought wildlife to Africa? No. But a lot of Europeans, a lot of African parts of land and the wildlife is privately owned today as we speak. Did Europeans ship animals from Europe to Africa? No. It's all, you see, all this, it was a European concept. The ownership and the land seizures and the land, all that came from European. Africans shared. Africans didn't understand the idea that a fixed asset such as land can be given to a human being physically to say it's mine. That's a bigger thing for black people to say a person should physically own something as because you don't know the future. Some people might you could say you don't want to say one tribe might own 50% of the land, and that tribe might be 2%, and the other tribe might be 90% of the population, and have no land. What are they going to do? Conflict would start rising. So that's why I say the land in South Africa belongs to black people or Africans. Black people. All tribes in Africa belong to everywhere in Africa. There is no land was owned by black people, but it was not claimed by black people. Owned by black people, but black people didn't claim and say, "Oh, you need a paperwork." No. No African has ever done that in all African countries. You see what I'm saying? If you come and say, "Well, you find land not being used," elephants in Africa, they were everywhere in Africa. They're not someone. No one can go to Africa and say the elephant is mine because I found it walking there. No. You see, but as we speak today, a lot of African wildlife is privately owned today. Europeans came in and divided themselves. In fact, they divided among themselves. They never divided among Africa. They divided among themselves. You go to Africa today, you pay mostly white people to see an elephant. Africans are forced to pay white people to see elephants, something which lived in their ancestors used to see every day. Well, is it fair? You see what I'm saying? So I don't buy the crap. That's what I want to say. The land in South Africa, the land Africa itself belongs to black people. You understand? Africa belongs to blacks, Africans, or black in particular, specific. You see what I'm saying? If you say, well, I will take land if it was not used, it belongs to me because it was not being used. Look, there are children on the street who go for playing there. You're not going to kidnap children in the street and say, well, they had no parents, so they're mine. You go to jail. You need to understand, when you're talking here, you need to be smart. You know what I'm saying? You don't claim things which are not used as yours. Because someone is not using, it doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't own it. I've got 17 pairs of shoes. I only use one. You're not going to take the remaining 15 and say they're yours. You know what I'm saying? So the argument that, oh, I came to South Africa. Remember, they didn't take only South Africa. They took all African countries. Where were black people? Remember, Cameroon was colonized. Uganda colonized. Cameroon, DRC, Angola, Nigeria, Ghana. All African countries were colonized. Where were black people? Those people who say, well, since black people, they were not using such as an... All African countries were once colonized. Tell me, where were blacks? Since all African countries were not colonized, where were black people? A lot of African countries, they had to fight, they had to go for a liberation armed struggle to take back the land, to take back everything which was taken away from them. You know what I'm saying? So you cannot say simply because South Africa was taken at the same time Nigeria was taken. Same time Kenya was taken, at the same time. So the argument that, there was nobody inside it, so the country belongs to me, that's a joke. All Africa, look at America. America is 95% European, but there were natives there. There's no native today. Where did they go? Every place where Europeans went and took over the land, there were people there. But they didn't. They disregarded those people. Those people were seen as pretty much not even human beings back in that time. Fast forward to today, we need to apply things according to what's the reality here, with facts. Not to say, well, you come to a country and say, well, how was Nigeria? Take it. Was there nobody in Nigeria? Why was Kenya colonized? Was there nobody in Kenya? How was Tanzania? There were people, but they were disregarded as human beings. There were people, but they were disregarded as human beings. So like I say, the land in South Africa belongs to black people, Africans in particular. That's all. Not just a Khoisan. A Khoisan is not special. There are thousands of tribes in Africa. They moved up and down every region they wanted to go, looking for livestock, for animals to feed and water. The Khoisan were not the only people found there. They were the only people found in the West. They were not the only owners. That's why I disagree. They were not the owners. They don't own land. They didn't create South Africa. They're not gods. Okay, they were just found there because they were hunting there. Some people have been there and moved on. You know, I don't buy that propaganda lie that, oh, the Khoi people were the first. They're not the first people. There is no place in Africa where you can say, wait, this is the place where black people originally started. This is where Adam and Eve, a black woman, was created by God here, and a black man was created here. You can pinpoint it here. Nothing like that. So don't play that in propaganda crap. And that's what I wanted to say. Okay? Any topic, any topic someone wants to say, mention below. Anything you want, any topic any person wants to discuss, should put it down. I'll make several videos for everything and every topic. I'll be making several videos for any topic. Anyone want to discuss anything, you put the topic down there. People subscribe and put any topic which you want to discuss about the continent or black people, whatever you want, any topic. Just subscribe and put a topic. You can write a statement, whatever you want to discuss, we can discuss about it. We have to be true now. We have to be reality. We need to keep it real. Thanks. Bye bye.